Hello and welcome back to MicroStrategy Rooster. Today's topic will be attributes. Specifically, I'll be talking about creating attributes and using attributes in reports and how that impacts the report and the SQL of the report. Okay, so the best way to start this is just basically dig in and start creating something. I'm going to create a new attribute from scratch. I'm going to create it in my reports folder, and I'm using the MicroStrategy tutorial because it's got some simple data that can illustrate how attributes work. Create a report attribute. It'll open three editors. The last editor, or the last one that opens up, will be the editor that lets you select from tables. Let's create a customer attribute. So I'm going to use the lookup customer. Let's look inside here. Okay, great. It's got a bunch of stuff here. Let's use the ID. You first want to use the ID, or you want to create the ID. Let's see if there's customer ID. It might, depending on your database and your tables, it might be called something else if you're creating a different kind of attribute. So here we have automatic and manual. If you select automatic, it'll select all the tables associated with customer ID. If manual will allow you to select them by yourself. Let's just do manual, keep it simple. So there we go. It's going to make the first selection that we used as a bold. It's assuming that you want to set it as lookup. But if you decide to use something else as lookup, you can change this. Okay, let's just keep one table for simplicity. Let's select a bunch of facts so that if we dump a metric on a report, it'll pull some actual data. Notice that it'll allow you to rename what you want to call this. Let's just keep it as ID, and it'll say which category do you want to label it. By default, I'd like to select the ID for an ID. It's numeric, and I don't care about sorting by ID, for instance. There's also a column alias. It'll try to choose the column name, but if you don't like this name, you can simply select and modify the alias. This is not the alias that you will see in the report. This is the alias that you will see in the SQL. See, it specifically says column used in temporary table SQL generation. Some people or some developers prefer to give them specific names. So if you do have a need, you could call it, for example, CID. You want to make sure that it has enough bytes. So if it's a year, you need 4. There you go. Now you create your new form. This is going to show up in the SQL as CID. Back to the definition. I'm done. I'm satisfied. Close it, or OK. Here it is, my new form, and these are the source tables it's going to use. Okay, so before we get out of this, let's add another form, a description form. Okay, so I'm going to add another form. Now look at the drop down. It's only going to bring back those selected by the ID. It's not going to bring all the tables in your data warehouse. Let's just go and pick up the customer birth date. Alright, and let's just keep it automatic. Alright, there we go. Description category, let's just call it birthday. Alright, and we don't want it date time, let's just keep it at date. We don't care about browsing, and I'm going to keep the default alias as customer birth date. Okay, okay. Gives you some warnings, you might want to read through them, but typically if you're doing the right thing, you'll be okay. So there we go. Let's go to the display and say, yeah, I just want to display a customer's birthday, but I also want to see his ID. I want to move it up. This is, if you had a prompt, it'll show you what items you see in the prompt. This is in the report, the defaults. You could also lock or unlock so that the elements of this attribute display or don't display. Sometimes you can have it locked, very special cases where you're just using it to manipulate a report, but you don't want the user to use the elements. or you can limit the numbers returned. You can allow the security filter to operate or not operate. This gets into the security and the row level security, and you can enable or disable caching of elements within this. Again, just keep these as defaults and worry about them at a project level. Alright, so here we go. We got the two forms. We're happy with it. Save. It'll give us the first name of the column, which was customer ID, but I'm just going to call it my customer. Okay. Save. Happy with that. Now I'm going to show you how to use it. You can't use, or you shouldn't use, any attribute or fact or anything at the schema level before you update the schema. Otherwise you're going to get either errors or unwanted results. Alrighty, so here we go. Let's create a report and see what we created so far. Blank report. Okie dokie. Let me shrink the size of this guy. Alright, so I'm going to grab my customer, drop it right on the report, and let's generate the report, run it. So it's showing us the ID and the birth date, customer ID and the birth date. Now this is not a good report necessarily, but you see what we're doing. We're creating two forms and we're displaying them. If you want to see which forms are available, there they are. They're both bold, mean they're both presented. If you want to hide one, you can go to the attribute form and let's hide the ID. You'll be left with your birth date for your customers. Okay. And one more thing you can do, you could alias this guy. So you can go at the data, and you can hit report data options, and then you can manipulate the display and say my customer birthday. Okay. Now you wait. Should change it for you, and there it is. You alias the attribute inside the report. It's still called my customer in your project, but inside the report you tailored it to your own need. Okay, so let us save and close this report and come back to it in a second. And call it a new customer report. Okay, I'll save it in the same location for simplicity. Alrighty. So let's go back to our customer attribute. Now we created two forms, but let's create something more advanced. Let's create a compound form. Okay, so I'm going to create a new form, and I'm going to create a form based on the first name and last name. They go together, right? So it makes sense to create a grouping for them. Okay, so I'm going to call it, I'm not using date. We already used description. It's not a date. I'd rather not use a none. Let me modify my categories and add a new one called name group. Okay, and I'm going to add it, and then I'm going to use it. Remember, this is just a category. Okay, so I'm going to call this first name. Okay, and it's a type text, and I'm not going to sort by first name, so I'm not going to worry about that. The alias will be the default customer first name, the column name. I'm happy with that. Save. Now look what I'm going to do. I'm going to reuse this category. So I'm going to create a new form. I'm going to use the last name this time, but I'm going to reuse that new category, the name group. And I'm going to call this last name. Okay, but I'm going to sort as well. Let's just do descending for kicks. Okay, and warned me, it says you are creating a group, and it says, are you sure you want to use this group? Yeah, I'm sure. Do you want to keep the name or do you want to modify the name? No, I'm happy with that name. Okay, you could change it and say new group 1, for instance. if you're trying to create multiple groups. Okay, so there we go. This is a bundle, meaning that there's going to be a direct relationship between first and last name. They always will be pulled into the report together, even if you don't display them at the same time. Here we go. So to display, you could, let's remove ID and birthday. See, you have the option displaying both or one. New report. And let's reuse my customer and see what happens now. So we're creating a new report. We're using my customer. Let's see what happens. It's only displaying the first name, but look here. You don't have the birth date anymore, right? So why did that happen? Well, alrighty. Let's play with the attribute one more time. You notice that we did create the first and last name as a grouping from a category perspective, but they didn't operate in as one item. Even though they are defined as to belong to one group, but they're really not operating together at the same time. We create that inside the attribute, not just inside the view. We'll add a new form. This is going to be a little bit, you can do it custom, you can customize it or use MicroStrategy functions, and I recommend using MicroStrategy functions, okay? So I'm going to use a string function, concatenate, string 1, string 2. So this is the form that you could use. You have two options here. You double click here, you click here and you click next. And then you say, okay, I want this string, and it will pull back columns for you to choose from. Or you can just remember to use that function, concat, and I'm going to use first name. Don't worry about the error. Let me just put a dot and last name. Okay. And let me just get a little bit creative here. Let's see if there's a function that I can use. And let me use the left string, and let's pick just the first letter of the first name. So I'm going to left str, and I'm going to say just the first letter. Validate, make sure I didn't make any errors. Okay, I'm good to go. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to have to choose the category. Obviously it's trying to push on me one of these, but none of them fit the bill. I'm just going to create a new category for this guy and I call it f.last. Okay, add, okay, and descriptively I'm going to call it first letter last name. Okay, keep it as text. I don't care about sorting. Alright, so there it is. First letter last name is a category f.last. It's concatenating left string, taking the first letter of the first name, dot, adding the last name from that lookup customer. And now I don't want the first name to be the default. I just want first letter last name to be my default. Okay, save and close. And let's rerun the report, the project, refresh it. Now remember, this report has been created after the modification, so we're going to have to manipulate it. Right? So I'll edit it first before we run it. Make sure the form that we selected is the one that will be displayed. So we're going to do this one. Let's just keep all of them for now and see what it looks like first. Alright, so here's the first separately, the last, the birthday, and the new one, the first dot last right here. Okay, If you look at the SQL, you'll see all this happening behind the scenes. Saying, okay, give me customer, birthday, last name, first name, and then that new formula that I created, all coming from one table. Alright, save and close. And let's do one more thing. Let me show you how to create a pure custom form. Alright, let's add a new form. This is a pure custom form. Apply simple is an OLAP formula that you can use, and I'm just going to do the year part of the first variable, 0. For you programmers out there, you know 0 is the first variable, and I'm going to bring the birth date. There we go. Unless I made an error, should be okay. So I'm saying give me the year portion of the birth date. I just care about the customer's year of birth. I don't want the whole birth date. And I'm using a pure apply simple, which means whatever I write inside the apply simple has to be, this part has to be database specific. I'm using an Access database because it's the MicroStrategy tutorial. Year is a defined term in the MicroStrategy database. It knows that this is, you're trying to pull the year form. If you're using a different kind of database like Teradata or something else, you might have a different form for different functions. So this is database specific. Okay, and I'm going to call this, let's give it, let me give it a new form. I'm just going to call it birth year. Add it. This is a category that I created, birth year. And I'm just going to give it a description called birth year. Okay? And it's no more a date, it's a number. It's just the year. Yes, yes. There it is. Okay, save and close. Update my schema. And let's edit my report. And let's make sure it's selected, the form. There's so many forms, right? So this is all for just for demo purposes, but usually you don't have to use all of them. So there we go. Now we got, you know, the first, the last, etc., etc. Like if you're wondering how to reorganize these, there might be more than one way, but just show you a simple way to do that. Just going to remove that first last name, put the year next to the year. And then I'm going to add it back. So I removed it and I added it, so it just reorganized it automatically. You could also manipulate things from the attribute display and push things, modify their orders here, right? So you could push up and down, etc. Okay, so there's two ways to do that. Alright, so I'm going to save and close this fellow. Actually, before we do that, let's just, for kicks, add a metric. Metric has to be using a column that is tied up to, this probably is. If you're not sure, just do this. Search for its components. Search for the components until you hit the fact. There's the fact. And let's see, is there a table that it's mapped to? Yep. So order detail was one of those tables that we mapped our customer to. So it's going to be able to trace it in the SQL. And if I'm wrong, we'll get an error. minute to run. I'm using an Access database on a local machine, so it's slower than you would expect. Alright, so there we go. Let's look at our SQL. And what is it doing? Well, notice there's 2 passes, and that's the way MicroStrategy will optimize your SQL. You can manipulate the VLDP and have this all in one pass, but I don't recommend that. So what is it doing is by ID, CID, pulling the order ID. Okay, so it's pulling these items in, and then what is it doing? It's pulling all the lookups up so it can count or do whatever it needs to do and find the max, in this case, for all those fields to present them in the lookup. And then it's interjoining this pass onto the customer, where the customer ID matches the customer ID, and then it groups by that customer ID that we select. So what is it doing? It's one pass to pull the fact or the fact data, another one to bundle it up and group it again, so it recounts. There we go, because it's a transaction count that we're doing, so it's recounting everything here. And how is it counting it? It's counting it where the customer ID matches the customer ID that we're selecting from the lookup. And there we go, and it groups by the customer ID because the count is at the customer ID level. So you need to know a little bit of SQL and your data to understand what's going on here. This is very simple right here, but it could be very confusing if you don't know much about SQL. Okay? Don't worry about it if you don't. Focus on the other stuff for now. So there we go, our design. And let's save this and close. Alright, and there's one more thing that I wanted to mention, that attributes. I'm just going to mention this. We'll cover them in a different demo. Talk about hierarchies a little bit, because they are directly. If you notice, there was child and parent. This allows you to link your attribute to other attributes. And the reason you want to do that, let's say add, it'll find all the ones that can be linked. For example, zip code. What you're doing here is saying, well, I don't necessarily want the zip code to be a form, but I want to be able to say that, it's probably a bad choice, but parents, zip code. So what I'm trying to say is that, the zip code has one or many customers. My customer must have one or only one zip code. This might be true, might not be true actually. You might have customers with multiple zip codes, so you have to be careful about this logic that you build. But the reason you do this is that when you create your SQL, this is telling MicroStrategy that if you want to pull my customer from a report that utilizes zip code, join it through this table to pull my customer out. So what it is, it's mapping out the relationship between multiple attributes, so when they appear on the same report, or one of them appears in a report and one appears in a filter, the SQL knows which relationship table to use to join these guys together. If you don't have a relationship, it will use whatever table that's driving the SQL. Usually it'll be the lookup, but it might be a fact table, and then you run into a problem, so you might want to define your relationships here. You got to be careful about these relationships. So that's one thing. The other thing is the drill map. For each attribute you could specify a drill map, so you could say, okay, I want you to drill down to for example, customer, I guess age, for example, could be an example. Or you can drill up from a customer to the customer state. So you're saying, okay, if I see a report and I see my customer on it, I can drill up and see and bundle or group my data at this customer state level rather than at this customer level. So the reason I don't want to cover this into detail, because you also can create these kind of default drills by creating hierarchies. We'll get into that in a different demo, but for now we'll just stick to the simple drill that I created. You also can manipulate VLDP properties and tell it how to join some stuff, and if you're using dynamic sourcing, what to do, and how to treat the ID constraint if you want to do something specific. I'm going to ignore all that. You also have close. You also have where did it go? You also have the ability to define the properties, which means adding a description. It's a good practice to add description to all your attributes, because when you're in a report and you hover over ABC my customer, I'll show you where that shows. It shows up when you hover over a report. Okay, so let's save and close this guy. Let's update the schema. Remember to always update the schema when you modify an attribute. Let's go run this guy again. Okay. Alrighty, so there we are, back to our good old report. And here we go. That was the drill up that I defined to customer state. Let me show you what it does. Notice it's trying to drill into the customer state because I told it it can. I also can tell it to do that by building a hierarchy, which we'll get to into a different demo. But there we go. Now it's showing your customer state and your customer. But notice for each customer, it's showing the state. If I want it grouped by the customer state, I could just drag this here. There we go. So now it's customer state. It's still broken by the my customer, but if I want to see aggregation, I just pull this up here to the report objects and it gets rolled up dynamically. Now you start seeing the numbers per state. So my drilling and my ability to use the OLAP properties and dragging things off allowed me to create this kind of slice and dice. Let me show you the SQL. And the SQL here. Okay, again we're selecting, but now we're adding one more selection, which is state. We're not just selecting customer, we're selecting state as well. Okay, and it's going to the customer city table to join the state to the customer. Great. That was defined in the state attribute. We didn't define it, it was defined in the state attribute. And still doing the same thing here, but also pulling in that state and then counting at the customer level, but enabling the roll up or the grouping at both customer and state. So even though the count is at the customer ID, when we dynamically pulled this off, this customer off, we did not manipulate the SQL. It's still in the SQL, but we dynamically rolled up the transaction per customer metric at a different level. Okay, so hopefully this demo was useful for you. Look forward to another demo where we're going to start creating hierarchies and show you how hierarchies work together with attributes to allow that a more sophisticated way of relating attributes to each other and drilling from one attribute to another. Okay, thank you very much.